The town of Silver Creek sat nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains that seemed to touch the sky itself. As Jake Morrison rode into town with Sarah and Samuel beside him, he felt a mixture of pride and nervousness that was entirely new to him. The place looked much the same as when he had left it 6 months ago, but everything felt different now that he was returning as a father. The general store owner, Henry Walsh, came out to greet them with a wide smile. "Jake Morrison, heard you were chasing bounties down in Kansas. And who might these young folks be?" "This is Sarah and Samuel," Jake said, helping the twins down from their horses. "My children. We'll be needing some supplies." Henry's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he was wise enough not to ask too many questions. "Well, welcome to Silver Creek, youngsters. Your pa here is one of the finest men in these parts." The twins looked at each other with barely contained excitement. This was the first time someone had referred to Jake as their father in public, and it made their new status feel real and official. Jake's ranch sat about 3 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a small log house, a barn, and corrals for horses and cattle. As they approached the property, Jake felt his stomach tighten with worry. The house looked even smaller than he remembered, and he wondered how he was going to make it suitable for 2 growing children. "It's perfect," Sarah breathed as she looked at the house surrounded by tall pine trees and overlooking a clear mountain stream. "It looks like something from a fairy tale." Samuel ran immediately to the stream, where he discovered it was full of small trout darting between the rocks. "Pa, look, there's fish everywhere." Jake smiled despite his worries. "That there's Willow Creek. Your mama would have loved this place." The first few weeks were an adjustment for all 3 of them. Jake had grown accustomed to the solitary life of a bachelor, eating when he was hungry and sleeping when he was tired. Suddenly, he found himself responsible for regular meals, bedtimes, and the countless small needs of 2 7-year-old children. Sarah proved to be remarkably capable, taking over many of the household duties without being asked. She learned to cook simple meals on the wood stove and mended clothes with skills that amazed Jake. Samuel was more interested in outdoor work, helping Jake feed the horses and repair fences with an enthusiasm that made up for his small size. The biggest challenge came when it was time to enroll the twins in school. Miss Elizabeth Carter, the schoolmarm, was a proper lady from Boston who had come west to civilize the frontier children. She took one look at the twins in their simple homemade clothes and raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Morrison," she said primly, "these children will need to be brought up to standard before they can join my classroom. They need proper clothes, proper manners, and proper speech." Jake felt his temper rise. These children have been through more hardship than most adults ever will. They're smart and polite and hardworking. If that ain't good enough for your school, then maybe your school ain't good enough for them. Miss Carter looked startled by his bluntness, but something in his tone made her reconsider. "Perhaps we could arrange a trial period," she suggested. "Let me work with them for a few weeks and see how they adapt." To everyone's surprise, Sarah and Samuel thrived in school. Their experiences on the trail had taught them to observe carefully and adapt quickly. Within a month, both children were reading above their grade level and helping slower students with their lessons. But their real test came when the town bully, a boy named Tommy Fletcher whose father owned the largest ranch in the area, decided to pick on the new students. "Hey, orphan kids," Tommy taunted one day during recess. "Heard your real parents died and left you for dead. Morrison probably just feels sorry for you." Samuel's face flushed red with anger, but Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. "My brother and I aren't ashamed of where we came from," she said quietly. "And we're not ashamed of our pa either. He's the bravest, kindest man we know." Tommy laughed meanly. "Your pa? He ain't your real pa. He's just a washed-up bounty hunter who probably can't even read." That was when Samuel lost his temper. Despite being smaller than Tommy, he launched himself at the bigger boy with fury that surprised everyone. The fight was brief but intense, ending when Miss Carter separated them. That evening, Jake found Samuel sitting by the creek with a black eye and scraped knuckles, looking miserable. "Want to tell me what happened?" Jake asked, sitting down beside him. Samuel told him about the fight and Tommy's cruel words. When he finished, he looked up at Jake with worried eyes. "Are you ashamed of us, Pa? Are you sorry you took us in?" Jake felt something break open in his chest. He pulled Samuel close and held him tight. Son, you and Sarah are the best thing that ever happened to me. I ain't ashamed of you, and I ain't sorry about nothing. You stood up for our family today, and that makes me proud. Word of the fight reached Tommy's father, Big Jim Fletcher, who came to the ranch the next day demanding an apology. He was a large, loud man who was used to getting his way through intimidation. Your boy attacked my Tommy unprovoked, Fletcher blustered. I demand satisfaction. Jake listened calmly, then asked Sarah and Samuel to tell their side of the story. When they finished, he turned back to Fletcher with cold eyes. Seems to me your boy got exactly what was coming to him. My children were defending their family against insults. I'd have done the same thing in their place. Fletcher's face reddened with anger. You can't let orphan brats disrespect decent folks in this town, Morrison. Those orphan brats are my children now, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the same dangerous tone it had held when facing the outlaws on the trail. And I won't stand for anyone disrespecting them or their memory of their parents. I suggest you teach your boy some manners before he picks on someone who won't be as gentle as Samuel was. Fletcher left in a huff, but word spread quickly through town about Jake's fierce defense of his new children. From that day forward, no one questioned the twins' place in the Morrison family or their right to be in Silver Creek. As winter settled over the mountains, Jake found himself living a life he had never imagined possible. Evening meant helping Sarah and Samuel with their schoolwork by lamplight. Weekends meant family fishing trips to the creek and teaching the children to ride and rope cattle. Sundays meant attending church together, where Jake found himself praying for the first time in years. The house had grown too, with Jake adding 2 small bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen where they could all eat together. Sarah had sewn curtains for the windows and planted a small garden that would bloom come spring. One snowy evening in December, as they sat around the fireplace, Sarah asked the question that had been on her mind for months. Pa, do you think Mama and Papa would be happy about us living here with you? Jake set down the bridle he had been repairing and looked at both children thoughtfully. I think they would be mighty pleased to know their children found a good home with someone who loves them. And I think they'd be proud of the fine young people you're becoming. Samuel curled up closer to Jake on the wooden bench they shared. Do you love us, Pa? More than I ever thought possible, son. As spring came to Silver Creek, the Morrison family had become an accepted part of the community. Jake had found steady work as a deputy sheriff, a job that kept him close to home and provided a regular income. Sarah had been selected to help Miss Carter teach the younger students, showing a natural talent for explaining things in ways children could understand. Samuel had developed into an excellent horseman and helped Jake with the ranch work. One day in late April, a letter arrived from the territorial government in Denver. Jake's hands shook slightly as he opened it, afraid it might be some legal challenge to his guardianship of the twins. Instead, it was official confirmation of their adoption. Sarah and Samuel Collins were now legally Sarah and Samuel Morrison, with all the rights and protections that came with being his children. That evening, they held a celebration dinner with cake that Sarah had baked and decorations that Samuel had made from wildflowers. As they sat around their table in the home they had built together, Jake raised his glass of milk in a toast. To family, he said simply. Blood or chosen, it's what matters most. Years later, when Sarah became the first woman schoolteacher in 3 counties, and Samuel grew up to be a respected rancher and sheriff himself, they would both tell their own children the story of how a hardened cowboy had saved 2 orphan twins and ended up saving himself in the process. But that evening in 1869, as they sat together in their mountain home with snow-capped peaks glowing pink in the sunset outside their window, they were simply a father and his children, grateful for the love that had brought them together and the future they would build as a family. Jake Morrison had never planned on becoming a father, especially not to 2 orphan children he had found beside a dusty trail in Nebraska. As they rode away from the cottonwood tree that marked their parents' graves, Sarah sitting behind him on his horse, and Samuel riding the gentle mare he had taken from the outlaws, Jake wondered what in blazes he was going to do with them. The nearest town was Broken Creek, a rough settlement 3 days' ride to the south. It was the kind of place where whiskey flowed freely and questions were rarely asked. Jake had been planning to drop the children at the orphanage there, collect his bounty money, and continue on his way. But, as they made camp that first night, something changed his mind. Sarah had taken charge of Samuel with a determination that reminded Jake of soldiers he had known during his cavalry days. She gathered firewood, helped prepare their simple meal of beans and hardtack, and made sure her brother stayed warm as the temperature dropped. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said as they sat around the small campfire, "we don't want to go to no orphanage. We heard terrible things about what happens to children there." Jake looked at her serious young face in the firelight. "Sometimes that's the way things are, girl. Life ain't always fair. Our mama said that good people sometimes come into your life when you need them most." Samuel spoke up quietly. "She said God sends them to help." Jake shifted uncomfortably. He had stopped believing in divine intervention years ago, after watching too many good men die while outlaws prospered. "Your mama was a fine woman, boy, but sometimes good people ain't enough." Despite his words, Jake found himself making excuses to delay their arrival in Broken Creek. When Sarah developed a slight cough, he insisted they rest an extra day. When Samuel's horse threw a shoe, Jake took his time finding a blacksmith in the tiny settlement of Mill Fork. During those delays, something unexpected happened. The children began to trust him, and, despite his best efforts to remain distant, Jake found himself caring about their welfare. Sarah showed him how to mend his torn shirt with neat stitches their mother had taught her. Samuel shared his carved wooden horse and asked Jake to tell him stories about his adventures as a scout. In Mill Fork, Jake learned that Broken Creek's orphanage had been shut down after the man who ran it was arrested for selling children to work gangs in the copper mines. The nearest orphanage was now 200 miles away in Kansas City. "Looks like you're stuck with us a bit longer, Mr. Morrison," Sarah said with a slight smile when he told them the news. Jake grumbled and complained, but secretly he was relieved. The thought of those two children ending up in some overcrowded orphanage or worse had been eating at him for days. As they traveled toward Kansas City, Jake began teaching the twins practical skills for surviving on the frontier. He showed Sarah how to identify edible plants and track animals. He taught Samuel how to start a fire without matches and how to read the weather signs in the sky. "Why are you teaching us all this?" Sarah asked one evening as she successfully started a fire using flint and steel. "Because," Jake said gruffly, "a person needs to know how to take care of themselves in this world. Can't always count on others being around to help." What Jake did not say was that he was beginning to imagine a life where he might not be alone anymore. The idea scared him more than facing down 6 armed outlaws. Their journey was interrupted when they encountered a family whose wagon had broken down beside a swollen river crossing. The father, a man named Peterson, had injured his back trying to fix a broken axle. His wife was pregnant and due to give birth any day. Their 3 young children were hungry and frightened. Without hesitation, Sarah and Samuel began helping the Peterson family. Sarah gathered herbs she had learned to identify and made tea for Mrs. Peterson's nausea. Samuel entertained the Peterson children with stories and games. Jake found himself fixing the wagon axle and hunting game to feed the entire group. "You got good children there," Mrs. Peterson told Jake as he helped her husband reset the axle. "Raise them well." "They ain't mine," Jake said quickly. Mrs. Peterson looked at him with knowing eyes. "Could have fooled me. They sure act like they belong to you." That night, as Jake lay in his bedroll listening to the Peterson children's laughter around the campfire, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He was not taking Sarah and Samuel to any orphanage. They had become his family, whether he had planned it or not. The next morning, he pulled the twins aside while the Peterson family was still sleeping. "I got something to say to you too," Jake began, his voice rougher than usual. "I ain't much good at pretty speeches, but here's the truth. I'm a hard man who's lived a hard life. I don't know the first thing about raising children properly. But I know you two deserve better than some orphanage where nobody cares what happens to you." Sarah and Samuel looked at him with wide eyes, hardly daring to hope. "If you're willing to put up with an old buffalo like me," Jake continued, "I figure we could stick together. I got a small place up in Colorado Territory, near a town called Silver Creek. It ain't much, but it's got a roof and walls, and the schoolmarm there is supposed to be decent. You could learn your letters and numbers proper." Sarah burst into tears and threw her arms around Jake's waist. Samuel grabbed hold of both of them. For a moment, the tough old bounty hunter felt his throat tighten with an emotion he had not experienced in years. "Does this mean you're going to be our papa now?" Samuel asked. Jake cleared his throat roughly. "I reckon it does, boy. God help us all." They parted ways with the Peterson family at the next river crossing, after Jake had helped them repair their wagon completely. Mrs. Peterson hugged each of the twins and pressed a small Bible into Sarah's hands. "For your new family," she said with tears in her eyes. As they headed north toward Colorado territory, Jake began to teach the twins about their new home. He told them about Silver Creek, a small but growing town where a man could make an honest living if he was willing to work hard. He had bought a small ranch there with money he had saved from his bounty hunting days, planning to retire to a quiet life raising cattle. "Will we have our own rooms?" Samuel asked excitedly. "We'll build whatever you need," Jake promised. "The house ain't much now, just 2 rooms and a kitchen. But we got time and lumber to make it bigger." Sarah rode quietly for a while, then asked, "Mr. Morrison, what do we call you now?" Jake considered this. He had always been Morrison, or Jake, to everyone who knew him. But these children needed something more, something that spoke of permanence and belonging. "Well," he said slowly, "I reckon you could call me Pa, if that suits you. That's what children usually call their fathers." "Pa it is," Sarah said firmly, and Samuel nodded his agreement. As they rode toward their new life in Colorado territory, Jake Morrison found himself planning for the future in ways he never had before. He thought about expanding the house, maybe adding a proper porch where the children could sit on summer evenings. He considered how to make sure they got a good education, and whether he might need to learn to read better himself to help them with their schoolwork. The hardened bounty hunter who had lived his life alone was becoming a father, and despite his fears about whether he was up to the task, Jake felt something he had not experienced in years: hope for tomorrow. The wagon wheels creaked to a halt beside the dusty trail that stretched endlessly across the Nebraska plains. Martha Collins wiped the sweat from her brow as she looked back at her husband Thomas, who was doubled over with another fit of coughing. Blood speckled his handkerchief, and she knew their time was running short. "Mama, is Papa going to be all right?" asked Sarah, one of the 7-year-old twins who sat huddled together in the back of the covered wagon. Her brother Samuel clutched a wooden horse their father had carved for him months ago when the journey west had begun with such hope. "Papa is just tired, sweetheart," Martha said, though her voice trembled. She had seen consumption take her own father years ago. The same hollow look in Thomas's eyes told her what she dreaded to accept. The Oregon Trail stretched before them like a ribbon of broken dreams. They had sold everything back in Missouri, the small farm, the livestock, even Martha's grandmother's china, to buy this wagon and supplies for their new life in Oregon territory. Now, 3 months into the journey, their dreams were crumbling like autumn leaves. That evening, as Thomas grew weaker, Martha made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her short life. She began writing a letter by the flickering light of their oil lamp. "To whoever finds this letter," she wrote with shaking hands, "my husband Thomas and I are dying of consumption. Our twin children, Sarah and Samuel Collins, are good children who deserve a chance at life. We have $47 hidden in the flour barrel and our wedding rings. Please give them a home if you have it in your heart to do so. May God bless you for your kindness." Thomas passed away 3 days later, just as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. Martha held his hand as he breathed his last breath, while the twins slept fitfully nearby. She buried him beside a lone cottonwood tree, marking the grave with stones arranged in a cross. Martha lasted only 5 more days. The consumption had taken hold of her lungs, and without Thomas to help drive the wagon, she had no strength left to continue. She spent her final hours teaching Sarah and Samuel how to find food and water, how to stay warm, and how to hide from dangerous men who sometimes traveled the trail. "Remember," she whispered to them as she lay dying, "you must stay together always. Take care of each other. You are all the family each other has now." The twins buried their mother beside their father under the cottonwood tree. Sarah, though only 7, was old enough to understand they were now alone in the vast wilderness. Samuel cried for 3 days straight, calling for his mama and papa. For 2 weeks, the twins survived on hardtack biscuits and water from a nearby stream. They slept in the wagon at night, huddled together for warmth as the October winds grew cold. Sarah tried to keep their spirits up by telling Samuel stories their mother used to tell, about brave children who overcame great hardships. But their food was running low, and winter was coming. They could see their breath in the morning air, and frost covered the wagon canvas. Sarah knew they could not survive much longer alone. It was on a gray Tuesday morning that they heard the sound of approaching horses. Sarah grabbed Samuel, and they hid under the wagon, watching as 6 riders appeared on the horizon. The men looked rough and dangerous, with scraggly beards and clothes that had not been washed in months. "Look here, boys," called out one of the riders, a man with a scar across his cheek. "Somebody's camp. Wonder if they got anything worth taking." The men dismounted and began searching through the wagon. They found Martha's letter and passed it around, some of the men laughing cruelly as they read it. "Orphans, said the scarred man. "Might be worth something in the right hands." Sarah pressed her hand over Samuel's mouth to keep him from crying out. She had heard whispers from other travelers about what happened to children who fell into the wrong hands on the frontier. Some were sold to work in mines or factories back east. Others simply disappeared. The men were about to search under the wagon when they heard another sound, a single horse approaching at a steady pace. Sarah peered out and saw a lone rider cresting the hill. The man sat tall in his saddle, wearing a weathered brown coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Well, said the scarred man to his companions. "Looks like we got company." The lone rider approached slowly, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. As he drew closer, Sarah could see he was a man of perhaps 40 years, with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Morning, gentlemen," the rider said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. "Seems you found something that don't belong to you." The scarred man stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "This here's our find, stranger. Wagon's been abandoned. Finders keepers, as they say." The lone rider dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and confident. "Name's Jake Morrison," he said. "I've been trailing you boys for the better part of 3 days. Seems you've been helping yourselves to quite a few things that don't belong to you." Sarah recognized the name. She had heard it whispered around campfires during their journey west. Jake Morrison was a former cavalry scout who now worked as a bounty hunter, tracking down outlaws and bringing them to justice. Some said he was the fastest draw in 3 territories. "You got no business here, Morrison," snarled the scarred man. "There's 6 of us and 1 of you." Jake smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I like those odds," he said quietly. The tension in the air was thick as molasses. Sarah held Samuel tighter, both of them barely breathing as they watched from their hiding spot. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but it would be burned into Sarah's memory forever. The scarred man reached for his gun, and Jake's hand moved faster than a striking snake. The sound of gunfire echoed across the plains, and when the smoke cleared, the scarred man lay on the ground, his gun still in its holster. The other 5 men looked at their fallen leader, then at Jake Morrison standing calmly with his smoking pistol, and made a wise decision. They mounted their horses and rode away as fast as they could, leaving behind the stolen goods they had been carrying. Jake holstered his weapon and walked over to the wagon. "I know you're under there," he said gently. "Come on out. You're safe now." Sarah and Samuel crawled out from under the wagon, dirty and frightened but unharmed. Jake knelt down to their level, his stern expression softening as he looked at the 2 small faces staring up at him. "You the Collins twins?" he asked, holding up Martha's letter. Sarah nodded, finding her voice at last. "Yes, sir. I'm Sarah, and this is Samuel. Are you going to take us somewhere safe?" Jake studied the letter again, then looked at the graves under the cottonwood tree. He was a man who had lived his life alone, tracking outlaws and sleeping under the stars. He had no experience with children, no desire to be tied down by responsibilities other than his own survival. But something about these 2 small orphans, standing brave and scared in the middle of nowhere, touched something deep inside him that he thought had died long ago. "Pack up what you need," he said finally. "We're leaving this place."